Let me tell you how the British East India Company destroyed its competitors in India before completely capturing this country. The British interest in India arose quite by chance during the period of confrontation between the British Queen Elizabeth and the Spanish King Philip II. It all started with the Queen's idea to create a private military fleet that would rob Spanish galleons that were transporting gold and silver for the Spanish crown from the New World. In this way, the Queen wanted to weaken Philip II before the upcoming war, but to make it look like the privateers were acting independently, and she knew nothing about it. And later, these privateers, using the Queen's support, began to expand the geography of their raids. So Francis Drake made a round-the-world voyage, robbing Spanish ships and ports along the way. And the legitimate targets of these sea corsairs were not only Spanish galleons, but also the ships of their allies, the Portuguese, who at that time actively traded with the East. And once in 1592, they captured a rather rich booty, the Portuguese galleon Madre de Deus. When it was delivered to England, it turned out that the holds were filled with gold, silver, jewels, and other luxury goods, such as spices and silk. At the same time, they came to understand that you can't capture all the ships, and why engage in such robbery if they can expel the Portuguese and take control of trade. And in 1600, a group of British merchant adventurers decided to establish a joint stock company called the Governor and Company of London Merchants, which trades in the East Indies. In parallel with this, they asked Queen Elizabeth I for the exclusive right to monopoly trade with India. At that time, the term India was used to name all lands within the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and the company received a monopoly on trade in a vast territory that began near the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and ended at the Strait of Magellan in South America. In the first years of its existence, the company developed actively. Trying to gain a foothold in the region, it created so-called factories, which were to develop relations with the local population and look for opportunities for trade. However, their competitors from other countries were also looking for the same opportunities. In 1602, Dutch East India Company was created. And when the Dutch appeared at sea, it quickly became obvious that these newcomers had managed to build a more efficient structure that quickly and ruthlessly destroyed their competitors. Of course, the British did not want to give up easily. They built outposts, hired additional warships, and made alliances with the local population. However, they understood perfectly well that sooner or later the Dutch would oust them. Plus, the struggle itself also required additional financial resources, which in turn reduced the company's potential profits. Therefore, at some point, the British decided to stop the struggle for the Spice Islands, and instead to concentrate their efforts on seizing control of India. Robert Clive played a very large role in the conquest of India. When he first arrived in India, this state was then called the Mughal Empire. But they were an empire only nominally, because the country was torn apart by internal strife. And this situation created an excellent breeding ground for political intrigue. Well, you could find a local provincial ruler, and playing on his desire to seize power over other provinces, you could offer him your own military support in exchange for exclusive access to this market. One interesting example of such a struggle was the Carnatic Wars, for control over the Carnatic region. The region itself was of interest to many different countries, but at the beginning of the 18th century, only the British East India Company and their competitor, the French Company, achieved the greatest success there. The position of Emperor Alamgir, who ruled until 1707 and who did not support the idea of trade monopolies, played a very important role in this. For example, when the British started a war known as Child's War to obtain such a monopoly in Bengal, they lost this war. And then they had to apologize and pay a fine. Therefore, the companies were forced to put up with this situation. Instead, they looked for workarounds through bribery and strengthening ties with local rulers and elites. And this situation remained until the War of the Austrian Succession broke out in Europe in 1740. Finding themselves on different sides of the barricades, the British and the French also started a war in India for control of the Carnatic region. At first, the Nawab of the Carnatic supported the French, but when they deceived him, he went over to the side of the British. However, despite the rather large size of the Indian army, he could not do anything against the more professional French, and the British were saved from defeat only by the professional defense of Fort St. David, thanks to the leadership of Robert Clive, which made it possible to withstand the siege until the support of the British fleet arrived. Later, the war in Europe ended, and as part of the peace treaty, controversial issues regarding India were also settled. Nevertheless, the French did not give up, and they looked for a new opportunity to strengthen their power in the region. This opportunity arose when Nizam of the Deccan Asaf Jah died. This was a higher-ranking ruler, and he nominally controlled a large territory, including the Carnatic. Therefore, when a vacancy arose, the French saw an opportunity to put their own person in this important position, and also at the same time to put a more loyal person in the place of the ruler of the Carnatic. The British, of course, understood perfectly well that a ruler loyal to the French would support them, and the British could lose the region forever. And of course, they could not allow this. Therefore, for their part, they began to promote their own candidate to this post. And soon, this political confrontation flared up into an armed confrontation between two competing coalitions, which was called the Second Carnatic War. The culmination of this war was the capture by the British of the city of Arcot, with a population of 100,000 people, which for some inexplicable reason was not defended by anyone, and Robert Clive with a small detachment quite easily captured it. Later, the French with their Indian allies realized their mistake and wanted to recapture the city. The British also did not waste time in vain, and before the approach of the enemy army were able to significantly strengthen the defense of the fortifications located in the center of the city. And although the French coalition had a five-fold advantage and they managed to enter the city itself, the British held the fort firmly. The siege of the fort itself lasted almost 2 months. At first, Clive was asked to surrender, promising him wealth and gifts, safety for his wards. And when it became clear that no one was going to surrender, the attacking side decided to go on a decisive assault. And here, fate played a cruel joke with them. This assault also included war elephants. The attacking side thought that they would be able to break through the wooden fortifications and thus they would be able to get behind the barricades. Instead, the shots from rifles and cannons frightened these animals and they began to flee, crushing their own army under them. This determined the outcome of the battle. Soon, reinforcements arrived for the British, and the British went on the offensive to destroy the remnants of the enemy army. Thus, the British won this war. Then, a few more years later, the French made a last attempt to capture the region, unleashing the Third Carnatic War, but it also ended not in their favor. After that, the French abandoned any attempts to capture the region. The British were able to fully concentrate on taking control of the region.